How's your hammer, everybody? I'm PTDevil, and welcome to another episode of The Deck Doctors. In this series, we'll be looking at some of the most unplayable archetypes in the whole game, figuring out why they're so bad, and designing some new support to help make them playable. The process we'll be using is examining what it is they do, diagnosing what their problems are, and prescribing a treatment for them to be less awful. With all that said, let's get to the video. Smell that? That's the smell of hubris. Knowing my audience, I'm fairly certain that I don't need to introduce Ojamas, mostly because nobody wants me to, but also because another certain YouTuber has since adopted Ojamas as sort of a thematic mascot for his channel, for better or worse. And since this series is heavily inspired by an old series said YouTuber used to do, a fact that I mentioned in the very first episode, yet people seem to miss that detail for whatever reason, I find it hard to believe that any of you are coming here ignorant of their overall presence. That being said, due to their history of being used by everyone's favorite GX character, Manjome Thunder, identifying a playstyle that is inherent and unique to Ojamas is about as apparent as the reference that spans the opening statements of the last 3 Deck Doctors episodes. Score yourself 50 bonus points if you got that, by the way. What do I mean by this? Well, you'll soon find out about that. We start off the review by looking at the poster boys of the archetype, and indeed half of Yu-Gi-Oh! Itself, those being Ojama Green, Yellow, and Black. Honestly, there's nothing I could say about their visual design that hasn't been said many times already, so I'm not going to bother. They're all level 2 light beasts, despite being objectively humanoid, and they each have 0 attack and 1000 defense. They're also normal monsters of all things, adding as much uselessness as humanly possible to their out-of-the-box utility, although their flavor text hints at the metric fuck-ton of support for these poor sons of bitches by stating that when the 3 are together, something happens. I haven't seen descriptions this useless and unhelpful since Salman Rushdie's bibliography. Jokes aside, the amount of support for these 3 is absurdly out the ass, presumably due to a belated overcompensated apology for their objective uselessness. A not insignificant amount of said support is for specifically these 3 as opposed to Ojamas in general, so you'll need to run at least 2 or 3 copies of each vanilla, as desperate for a retrain as they are. Now get that shit off of my screen before I have to look at them any further. Later in the archetype's lifetime, we got some actual decent members in the set, starting with Ojama Blue. This design seems to be targeting me as a person. Same stats as the originals, but with an effect this time. When this card is destroyed by battle and sent to the graveyard, you can add 2 Ojama cards from your deck to your hand. Even for 10 years ago when this card first came out, having a searcher that went off when it's destroyed only by battle was severely underwhelming. However, the amount of advantage you can gain off of this card, combined with the advantage you can gain off of whatever you search, is fairly formidable, all things considered. Worst case scenario, you can crash this thing into something bigger in order to start making plays during your main phase 2, because searching 2 cards off of one is an effect that is definitely worth the effort. Run 3 of these. The last of the main deck monsters is Ojama Red, by and away is the ugliest of the lot, though I do have to agree that his expression does resonate with me, especially in the mornings. His effect reads that when this card is normal summoned, you can special summon up to 4 Ojama monsters from your hand in attack position. The amount of field presence this card is capable of is unbelievable, however, it is not without its faults. The effect triggers only on the normal summon, meaning that you need to already have extensive setup in your opening hand in order to take advantage of the effect. Not impossible, but it still requires a number of very specific cards in order to use properly. Furthermore, like I mentioned earlier, this is the last of the main deck Ojamas, meaning that you can only have access to a maximum of 14 monsters to summon with this effect, 9 of which are vanillas, meaning that the inherent usefulness is almost exclusively limited to outside support. All that being said, it's still an insane effect to use, and you shouldn't ever run any less than 3. Their first fusion is Ojama Knight, featuring the least effective knight I've ever seen since that one guy from Konosuba. He's a level 5 with 2500 defense, requires 2 Ojama monsters as material, and he blocks up to 2 unused main monster zones when he's summoned. Zone blocking was a gimmick they decided to slap onto the early Ojamas, and all things considered, it probably should have stayed on the production line. Unless you managed to collapse the opponent's entire front row, it usually didn't matter for much, and blocking a linked zoner's 2 is usually a too little too late kind of scenario. It also can't block off extra monster zones, which is yet another blow dealt to them by Master Rule 4. It is the most generic and easily accessible Ojama fusion, even though that isn't saying much, so it's often the only thing you're capable of making on the first turn. It's also a level 5, so it can be summoned off of instant fusion if you're absolutely out of literally any other options. Not my favorite to run, but 1 or 2 couldn't hurt. The next monster is Ojama King, the sexiest son of a bitch in the entire card game, or at least that's what this guy told me. This prime specimen of a man is a level 6 fusion with 3000 defense, requires specifically Ojama's green, yellow, and black as material, and he blocks off up to 3 of the opponent's monster zones. It's not as bad as it initially seemed, since gathering the 3 original Ojamas isn't too hard thanks to a certain support card we'll get into later, and it's also essentially a game ender if you manage to summon it in Duel Link, so it's got that going for it. However, since it's the exact same thing as Knight except bigger, all of the issues I mentioned in the previous card apply here as well. It's the closest thing pure Ojamas have to a boss monster, so you'll have to run 1 or 2 of these due to a sheer lack of options, but that doesn't mean you have to like it. Well, that is this card and the last monster in the lineup, the esteemed Ojama Emperor. He's a Link 3 with all down arrows, requires 3 beast monsters including an Ojama monster as material, and has the following effect. If Ojama Country is in a field zone, this card gains 3000 attack. Also, it cannot be destroyed by card effects. Your opponent takes any battle damage you would have taken from battles involving this card. You can target 1 Ojama monster in your graveyard except a Link monster, special summon it. Also, you cannot special summon monsters from the extra deck for the rest of this turn except fusion monsters. You can only use this effect of Ojama Emperor once per turn. The specifics of the field spell effect will make sense once we get to it, but I'm sure nobody will fault me for wanting to put it off. Anyway, despite looking reasonably uncomfortable with himself, he is a perfectly fine boss monster. The damage reflection effect is handy to have on a Link monster with 0 attack, and even if he's boosting himself to 3k, that's not an insurmountable number, so it's nice to have some incentive for your opponent not to attack it. If there was any battle protection effects in the archetype whatsoever, I'd go as far as to say it qualifies as a legitimate win condition, but as it stands, it's an inconsistent play extender with some neat tricks as compensation for your 3 monster buck.
If you can lift me from the throne, you will become the new Ojama Emperor. It's not a good idea, so if you want to leave me here, I respect that.
Their first spell card is Oja Magic. Who dat man in there? Yes, I already knew I used that joke in the last episode, but this card is much older and you can't just hand wave this one as just a random spirit. Anyway, it's a normal spell with this effect. If this card is sent from the hand or field to the graveyard, add 1 each of Ojama Green, Ojama Yellow, and Ojama Black from your deck to your hand. Honestly, the worst part about it is that it only works on the vanillas. Well, that and it needs to search 1 of each, so if you're out of 1 of them, then it can't be activated, all but ensuring you have to max out on each of them. That being said, being able to go +3 off of simply using this card as discard fodder is ridiculously powerful. There's more than enough discard effects in the archetype for you to use this, so there's rarely a moment when it's dead in your hand, so feel free to run 2 or 3 of these. Next up, we have Oja Muscle. This card is always treated as an Ojama card. What? Setting aside the TCG localization mishap, would it kill these guys to run grammar check on these things? I mean, problem-solving card text exists for a reason, so I would assume that proper grammar would fall under that same category. To be fair, a card with this erratum is yet to be printed, as evidenced by the lack of problem-solving card text on this one, but it was also placed on the official card database, so I don't know what to think anymore. Anyway, back to the effect. Select 1 face-up Ojama King. destroy all Ojama monsters on the field except the selected Ojama King. It gains 1,000 attack for each monster destroyed this way. While this thing could potentially finish off a limping opponent or even OTK them in combination with a number of specific support cards, the most you're ever going to get out of this card is a bricky win more effect. Unless you're in an Ojama mirror match, which happens only once every 15 Helio cycles, you're going to be the one controlling the Ojama monsters that this card uses more often than not. This means that you're going to be going into a huge minus off of this card rather than it actually being advantageous to your position. It also only works on specifically Ojama King, which, need I remind you, is a fusion monster that requires 3 very specific monsters of material and a fusion spell, no matter how searchable each of those are. There is some recursion in the archetype, so once you make it once, you'll have access to it once you need it, but even then, all you get out of it are attack numbers on a monster with 0 original attack. This is ignoring the field spell, of course, but that just opens up another can of worm zeros that we'd have to deal with. It's searchable enough, and it can be used as discard fodder at worst, so if you're going to run it, I wouldn't run more than 1. The next card is Ojama Delta Hurricane, featuring not 1, but 2 exclamation points in it. Some cards should really take note. You can only activate this card while Ojama Green, Ojama Yellow, and Ojama Black are face up on your side of the field. Destroy all cards on your opponent's side of the field. Huh. So that's what happens when the 3 are together. A whole lot of big dick energy. Jokes aside, this is actually pretty good. Ojamas themselves are incredibly consistent, so getting them together shouldn't be too hard to accomplish. There aren't that many options to special summon all 3 at once, and those that can often require extensive setup, but that shouldn't be enough to consider not running it. Again, it's searchable when needed, so I wouldn't run more than 2 copies at most. Oh, and here's a fun one. It's time to play another round of Is Fake Yu-Gi-Oh! Good enough for Real Yu-Gi-Oh! Which I didn't think would happen again after Arcana Force. Ojamandala is currently an anime-only card, yet for whatever reason, Duel Links decided that it needed to be in their game. Activate only by paying 1,000 life points if an Ojama Green, Ojama Yellow, and Ojama Black are in your graveyard. Special summon 1 copy of each from your graveyard. Much like the last time this situation came up, I am going to debunk this entire card's existence by bringing up an already much better existing card to counter it. In this case, the word of the day is Try White. This is a normal spell that lets you target 3 level 2 or lower normal monsters in your graveyard and special summon them. In an Ojama deck, it accomplishes the exact same thing as Ojamandala without the life point cost or needing specifically 1 of each, as it can also summon any combination thereof if need be. The worst part is that Try White was already a thing in Duel Links and was seeing tons of play in Ojama decks long before they added Ojamandala into the game, so it's really a wonder why they felt the need to adapt this one in the first place. Even if this thing does make it into the real game, as it stands right now, you'd probably be better off just running Try White instead. The next card is Ojama Simulation. Reveal 1 Light Machine Fusion monster in your extra deck and banish any number of Ojama monsters from your hand, face-up field, and or graveyard. Special summon fusion materials with different names whose names are specifically listed on the card you revealed from your hand, deck, or graveyard equal to the number of monsters banished to activate this effect. You can banish this card from your graveyard, then target 3 of your banished Ojama monsters, shuffle them into the deck, then draw 1 card. Not only does it take its cost from any accessible zone, including the graveyard, in order to special summon up to 3 monsters from anywhere, including the deck, but it also immediately recycles said cost and gives you an extra draw on top of that without a once per turn clause of any kind. Explains everything, right? Now the next card is okay, fine, I'll explain what's going on. So apparently the latest wave of Ojama support decided that it wanted to say fuck all to making actual Ojama support, and instead endeavored to focus on the nigh impossible task of supporting the deck used by the guy who used them. Yeah, as it turns out, Ojamas were only one of 3 notable archetypes that made up the triad that was the Chaz's deck. One of the other legs of this deck was made up of the Machine Union series, consisting of V Tiger Jet, W Wing Catapult, X Head Cannon, Y Dragon Head, and Z Metal Tank. Among the first Union monsters ever added to the game, the latter 3 were also used by Seto Kaiba, being some of the few cards to be used by more than one main character across more than one series, minus the parallel world versions of the same characters in Arc 5. They were also the first contact fusion monsters in the game, being able to fuse at will into a number of underwhelming 2-piece fusions on their own, and combine all 3 into the much more intimidating XYZ Dragon Cannon. The other 2 members of the series came properly in the GX era, and came with a 2-piece fusion of their own in the form of VW Tiger Catapult. This in turn can contact fuse with the aforementioned XYZ Dragon Cannon into the surprisingly underwhelming VW XYZ Dragon Catapult Cannon. For being a contact fusion of 2 other contact fusions which themselves need a total of 5 very specific monsters, you would expect this to be a win condition in and of itself, but all you get out of this monster over XYZ is 200 more attack, banishing instead of destroying the target, and no discard cost. Also, because Ojama Assimilation works on any light machine fusion monster, it can also work on Cyber Twin Dragon, Cyber End Dragon, UFO Roid Fighter, and Invoked Mechaba of all things. But again, it's not relevant in this discussion, and trying to build a Cyber Ojama deck is a recipe for madness. As for how this would work in an Ojama deck, the simplest answer is that it doesn't. Even though there's a few other banishing effects in the archetype, said cards also recycle the banished cards, with one of them having the exact same effect as this card. Thus, without an archetypal target for this card's first effect, Ojamas themselves really can't benefit from this card in any conceivable way. The next card is Oja Match. It's a quick play with this effect. Send 1 Ojama card from your hand or face up from your field to the graveyard. Add to your hand 1 Ojama monster with a different name and 1 Armed Dragon monster from your deck and or graveyard. Then, immediately after this effect resolves, you can normal summon one of those monsters. During your main phase, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target 3 of your banished Ojama monsters, shuffle them into the deck, then draw 1 card. This introduces the 3rd member of the so-called Chaz deck, that being Armed Dragons. They were a series of LV monsters, which were kind of a pseudo-sub-archetype introduced in the early mid-GX era. They consisted of Armed Dragon level 3, who could then evolve during your standby phase into its level 5 form, who after destroying a monster by battle could then evolve further into its level 7, which basically served as a pseudo lightning vortex on legs, being able to discard a monster in order to destroy any monster the opponent controls with less attack than the discarded monster. There's also Armed Dragon level 10 and Dark Armed Dragon, neither of which are relevant to this discussion. And Armed Dragon Catapult Cannon, which is technically relevant, but is so far removed from anything Ojama related, I'm electing to ignore this one as well. Also, Hardened Armed Dragon doesn't count, everyone. Just thought I'd let you know. Anyway, back to this. Due to how the Armed Dragons were adapted into the archetype in comparison to the Machine Unions, I say this one can qualify as actual Ojama support, since splashing 1 level 3 for the sake of using this card is much easier, and considering the fact that it actually supports Ojamas directly is much more helpful as well. Also, it has the same graveyard effect as Ojama Assimilation, though without any banishing effects on its own, it will need some additional setup beyond that. All in all, it's a decent Ojama support card, which is a refreshing change of pace coming off of the last one. Okay, I can't really put it off any longer, so let's take a look at their field spell, Ojama Country. Once per turn, you can send 1 Ojama card from your hand to the graveyard to special summon 1 Ojama monster from your graveyard. While you control a face-up Ojama monster, switch the original attack and defense of all monsters on the field. I don't think it's an understatement to say that Ojamas really can't survive without this one. The revival effect seems underwhelming at first, but there are actually 2 positives to it that make it worthwhile. For one thing, it discards as cost, meaning they can easily trigger Oja Magic's effect, and also it works on any Ojama monster in the graveyard, including Knight, King, and Emperor, the latter of which can also revive another Ojama monster, which in turn includes the former two as well. In other words, you can continually recycle any of your boss monsters as needed with this card. The stat flipping effect is incredibly fun to use, as not only does it get King to a base 3k attack, but it also allows for some unconventional tech, such as using Millennium Shield as a beater. It doesn't work on Link monsters, hence Emperor's effect and interacting directly with it, but since Link monsters with 3k or more attack are far and few between, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. Also, since the rulings don't explicitly state it otherwise, pairing Ojama Country against another Ojama Country switches the stats twice, meaning they stay the same. I am saying this knowing full well that most of you are aware of this by now.
You know what happens to Ojama Country when it's matched up with another Ojama Country? It fucking sucks.
Oh no! Oh! What the fuck? What the fuck?
2 minuses make a plus.
So yeah, this card is a key part of a pure Ojama playstyle, so you'll definitely want to max out on this one. However, before we move on, I want to analyze just one part of this artwork out of all of this. There's definitely a lot to take in here, but I just want to point out one thing. Right off the bat, your eye is immediately drawn to the lower right corner of this artwork, where you will find Ojama Lime, the pin-headed third cousin twice removed of Ojama Green, and believe me, he was removed for a reason. He's a plucky little sand farmer from Ojama Country who has since been aggressively memed into existence by everyone's favorite Slavic stud muffin. However, upon further inspection of the artwork, you will find 2 other Ojamas who are objectively yellow and black in color. We know that this trio wasn't a mistake because we also find their skulls abandoned in some random graveyard in the background of Solidarity, revealing a skull deformity similar to Bart Simpson. So all this together can only mean that Konami took the time to design retrains for the original Ojamas, but never actually made them over the course of 11 freaking years. I can think of exactly 2 reasons as to why this is. Either Konami was actively considerate enough to spare us from having to look at this motherfucker any more than we actually have to, or they were simply allergic to us having fun. After doing 10 episodes of Deck Doctors, I know which one I'm going with, but frankly I wouldn't rule out the former entirely. Their first trap card is Ojama Trio. Special summon 3 Ojama tokens, beast type light level 2s with 0 attack and 1000 defense, to your opponent's side of the field in defense position. They cannot be tributed for a tribute summon, and each time one is destroyed, its controller takes 300 damage. Somewhat infamously, this card was on the ban list for the longest time due to being able to easily block off an opponent's front row in addition to sporting more than a few OTK strategies. Said ban also occurred at the onset of the Synchro era, where the card was less useful than ever, since giving your opponent free tokens resulted them having access to almost any Synchro monster they wanted with a tuner on the field. And nowadays, as we're approaching the end of the Link era, activating this card basically amounts to the card game equivalent of shooting yourself in the arm to blind your opponent with your own blood. Yes, that is a bit graphic, but the sentiment is very much accurate. The OTK potential for this card still stands, but with much better, more consistent OTKs in the game, it's nowhere near worth the effort. As mentioned before, it can be used with Oja Muscle, but that just serves to make one brick you win more card into 2, making a somewhat consistent deck lose almost all of it. However, this card does get a worthy successor in the form of Ojama Duo. Special summon 2 Ojama tokens to your opponent's field and defense position. These tokens cannot be tributed for a tribute summon, and each time one is destroyed, its controller takes 300 damage. During either player's turn, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard, special summon 2 Ojama monsters with different names from your deck. While everything I said about the previous card still stands with the first effect of this one, the damage is mitigated by only summoning 2 tokens instead of 3. The graveyard effect, however, is incredibly helpful, and considering the discard potential, is worth going out of your way to use. It's not perfect, and you'll still want to discard Ojamas over this card more often than not, but given that it can summon blues during the opponent's turn to potentially get 2 searches for no cost, it's not the worst card by far. 1 or 2 should be fine. The last card is Ojama Pajama, revealing that Konami still wasn't done fucking over Dustons after MR4. It's a continuous trap with this effect. If an armed dragon monsters and or a light machine fusion monsters you control would be destroyed by battle or card effect, you can banish 1 Ojama card from your hand, face-up field, or graveyard instead. You can only use each of the following effects of Ojama Pajama once per turn. During the main phase, you can add 1 Ojama card from your deck to your hand, then discard 1 card. And if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon as many of your banished Ojama monsters as possible. The protection effect may seem to only help Chaz decks at first, but again, since Ojamas run an Armed Dragon level 3, it can service as a decent wall while feeding into its floating effect. Furthermore, it also searches and discards an Ojama card, meaning that it can set up Duo and activate Ojamagic while searching them out simultaneously. It's not the best thing to run, and it is still a trap card, so it's a lot slower than would be liked, but 1 or 2 should be fine. Here's Keiran's pure Ojama build, taking advantage of all the control effects the archetype has to offer. Here's his current Ojama/ABC/Orcus build, which he has been maining non-stop. And here's his Extra Link build, which I have no idea how it's supposed to work, and frankly I don't want to find out. So now we come to the diagnosis. First and foremost, an actual win condition for Ojamas themselves is crucial here. Ojamas actually do a lot of shit, but without an end goal in mind, they're basically an engine sitting on blocks doing nothing. That's not to say they can't build a board, but since they all require outside support, there's still some brick potential in an otherwise consistent deck. Some versatility would be nice as well, since Ojamas do have a bit of a one-trick pony vibe to them. As an extension to this, they would also need some more options to do what they do best in addition to doing everything else. Because if I had to call them out, their biggest weakness is in their predictability, meaning that they're far easier to counter than would like. But ultimately, what they really need is a way to stand out on their own, as opposed to forcing the player to give more focus to Chaz decks as opposed to them individually. And now we come to the prescription, but unfortunately I'm not even going to try to touch this one. Contrary to what you may be thinking, this isn't due to any adversity toward the archetype, despite my constant ripping of their visual design. Remember, I was able to objectively review and support Burning Abyss despite my abject hatred for the deck. No, I'm going to be deferring this one because this archetype is basically Keiran's baby. Even before Deck Doctors began, Keiran made the Ojamas his personal signature for reasons I can't even fathom and frankly don't want to. But nevertheless, he has had a long and invested interest in making Ojamas good enough to be worth playing on their own. In fact, he is so much more devoted than I am that I'm actually going to step aside and let the man himself introduce his creations on his own. Keiran?
Hello there, I am the Chaz, or as most of you have known me, Keiran. I'm a friend of PT, and I have a great reputation for both machine archetypes and the titular Ojamas. Ojamas have always appealed to me. God, I am never saying that they appeal to me again. Oh my god, have you looked at them? Due to both a quirky art style and interesting effects that they have. I picked them up way back when they were first released in the TCG, and have followed the deck as new support has come up over the years, following them from their beginnings as an awkward control deck with huge blowout cards like Hurricane, to a very powerful and explosive engine for decks like ABCs. My main deck whenever I play Yu-Gi-Oh! Is Ojama ABC, in fact, and I have practiced and refined them for years. I came here with PT to create some awesome new cards for this old and strange deck that's got a special place in my heart. Since the retrains all share similar effects, I'll go over them all at the same time. For the retrains, we have Ojama Cream, Ojama Lime, and Ojama Gray. All three are level 2 light beast-type monsters with 0 attack and 1000 defense, with the following effects. This card's name is always treated as Ojama's yellow, green, and black, respectively. When your opponent activates a spell, monster, trap card, or effect, quick effect, you can negate the activation, and if you do, destroy it. You must control at least 2 other Ojama monsters to activate and resolve this effect. If this card is sent from the hand to the graveyard, you can add 1 Ojama spell, monster, or trap card from your deck to your hand. You can only use each effect of Ojama Cream, Lime, and Gray once per turn. These act as complete retrains of the vanillas in the same way that Harpy Lady number 3 counts as Harpy Lady, and they can be searched out with Oja Magic and help fill the role of the previous cards in the deck. You can leave them on field for powerful control and negation effects later on, or you can use them as material for a summon and gain further advantage in the deck that already gains a ton of advantage, though this time it's not as empty as it was before, so it's actually meaningful to keep them out. Our next monster is Ojama Armed Dragon Rider. It's a level 7 light dragon monster with question mark attack and defense with the following effect. Cannot be normal summoned or set. Must first be special summoned by sending 1 Ojama monster and 1 armed dragon monster from your hand or field to the graveyard. This card's attack and defense is equal to the number of Ojama monsters that are banished or in your graveyard times 500. You can discard 1 Ojama card, destroy all monsters your opponent controls with attack less than or equal to this card's defense. You can only use this effect of Ojama Armed Dragon Rider once per turn. This serves as one of the only monsters inside of the deck, outside of the previous armed dragons, that actually has attack points without outside assistance like Country, or some other boost, even Oja Muscle. And being both an armed dragon and an Ojama, it gives it the ability to be searched with either part of Oja Match's effect, being you can search it as the Ojama portion and normal summon Armed Dragon level 3, or search it as the Armed Dragon and summon an Ojama. It also has the same destruction effect as level 7, but being a little bit more flexible as it uses its defense to do it. So you can use it to destroy things like Link monsters, anything that's face up like Armed Dragon level 7 does, but not as dependent as the cards you have in hand due to Ojamas not having any attack. Being it's also both, it's also granted the effects from Pajama and another spell card that we will get to in a moment that helps to protect the card from others. Now we're switching it up a little. We covered Armed Dragon Rider, and now we get to Armed Dragon. And Armed Dragon is a level 4 wind dragon monster with 1000 attack and defense with the following effect. Cannot be normal summoned or set, must be special summoned by tributing 1 dragon monster, gains 200 attack for each monster in your opponent's graveyard, and once per turn, when a monster effect is activated, you can discard 1 card, negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. If this card is destroyed by battle, or if this card in its owner's possession is destroyed by an opponent's card effect, you can special summon 1 armed dragon monster from your hand or deck, except Armed Dragon, ignoring its summoning conditions. This is a retrain of sorts, in the same vein that Silent Magician and Silent Swordsman were. More level monster support than anything else, and inside the deck, it also is a search option through Oja Match. You can set up an extra negate using Armed Dragon Rider, use it to summon Armed Dragon level 10 or Dark Armed Dragon from your decks because it ignores summoning conditions, as well as it makes the amazing Armed Dragon Catapult Cannon way easier to summon since you can special summon level 7 from deck, completely removing the need to basically run level 5, though level 5 is still pretty decent. Now we get to the extra deck, where the first monster we're covering is Mecha Ojama King, the level 5 light machine fusion monster with 0 attack and 3000 defense that requires Ojama Yellow, Ojama Green, and Ojama Black as material. Must first be fusion summoned or special summoned by tributing 1 Ojama King you control. You can discard 1 card, special summon as many Oja Machine tokens as possible, but they cannot be tributed or used as material for a summon. During the end phase, destroy all tokens on the field, and if you do, inflict damage to your opponent equal to the number of destroyed tokens times 300. You can only use each effect of Mecha Ojama King once per turn. It's a more aggressive version of King for sure, and it puts out a lot of numbers at your opponent. Destroying all tokens helps to defeat other more niche cards like Scapegoat, even Lair of Darkness gets hit by it, and more importantly, it being a light machine that specifically lists monsters, it is a target within the deck itself that Ojama Assimilation can use. So you can summon the retrains or the vanillas from deck. It also combos super well with Ojama Emperor, being that you can first fusion summon King, then tribute King to summon Mecha, and use Emperor's effect to revive King. Ojama Dragoon is a rank 2 light beast exceed monster with 0 attack and 2500 defense with the following effect. It requires 2 level 2 Ojama monsters, and you can detach 1 material from this card, then activate one of the following effects. First, special summon 1 Ojama or armed dragon monster from your hand. Second, switch the original attack and defense of 1 monster on the field until the end of the next turn. Third, shuffle up to 3 of your banished Ojama cards into the deck, then this card can attack a number of times equal to the number of cards shuffled into the deck by this effect. You can only use this effect of Ojama Dragoon once per turn. It's an interesting card for sure, being that it's an Exceed monster, and cards like Emperor and Ojama Assimilation don't really facilitate that kind of play. However, it allows more monster-focused gameplay without relying on the spell cards, so it gets around a couple floodgates. It's a light beast, so you can run floodgates yourself.
Okay, I was planning on not interjecting here, but as it turns out, Keiran made a much larger error than I expected at first. Since Dragoon is in fact a dragon type rather than a beast type, running floodgates alongside this isn't as viable as he's implying, since Rivalry wouldn't let you keep this and another Ojama on the field. You could use it with Highlander, though that is opening its own set of problems as well. Also, since it's a dragon, it can be tributed once its Xyz materials are gone to summon Armed Dragon in order to use his effect and float into one of his targets. I'm sorry for having to cut in there, but I just had to set the record straight. Please continue.
It's a walking Ojama country, so it's way easier to access sometimes. For instance, you can normal summon Red and overlay Red and another Ojama into Dragoon and still have an Ojama country effect. Plus, if you combine it with country, you can use it to return the attack of a monster back to its normal. It also serves as more recursion and recovery, since it can shuffle back Ojama cards, meaning that cards that will banish themselves like Duo, Match, and Assimilation will be sent back into your deck after you use them. It being able to summon any Ojama or Armed Dragon from your hand also helps a great deal, being that you can summon Armed Dragon level 3 to fuel an effect or a tribute, or even summon just another copy of Blue to crash and search during your opponent's turn. Ojama Jack is a Link 2 light beast monster with 0 attack and a upward arrow and a downward arrow, requiring 2 Ojama monsters to be summoned and gaining the following effect. If this card is summoned, you can discard 1 Ojama card. Special summon 1 Ojama monster from your graveyard to a zone this card points to. You can banish 1 Ojama monster you control, activate 1 Ojama spell or trap card directly from your deck. You can only use each effect of Ojama Jack once per turn. It's a very easy first turn consistency booster, being a monster that you can just summon that discards a card, for instance Oja Magic or one of the other cards, to revive a monster, has more material on the field, and being that it banishes itself to get out of the way for its effect, you can access extremely powerful spell or trap cards, as well as getting the searches from Pajama and another spell card that we'll get to in a moment that helps the consistency of the deck. Overall, it's a pretty solid monster. It won't see a lot of time on the board, but all the time that it spends on the board is highly impactful. Ojama Mandala, we all know what this is. We've played it in Duel Links, we've seen it in the anime, and it's better in the deck now due to the retrains not being vanillas, as well as being searchable by Cream's effect. So it's a solid revival spell with a negligible cost that you can use after making Emperor, for instance, and allows you to make other plays, such as summoning Dragoon to go into a play before using Emperor's revival effect. Ojama Delta Thunder is a normal spell card with the following effect. If you control Ojama Green, Ojama Yellow, and Ojama Black, you can inflict 500 points of damage to your opponent for each card in their hand and on their side of the field. Then, you can add 1 Ojama Delta Hurricane from your deck or graveyard to your hand. You can only activate 1 Ojama Delta Thunder per turn. It gives more incentive to leave the retrains or vanillas out, and serves as a bonus copy of Hurricane, which is horribly hard to search and really awkward to use. and gives the deck a more controlling board when focusing on the small monsters, as well as retraining the anime version of this card, which just dumped Hurricane and did Hurricane's effect, as well as the burn, and combos well with cards like Duo, Trio, to get extra burn damage and get that little bit extra in on your opponent. Inferno Roar is a normal spell card that is more Armed Dragon than Ojamas, but since the archetypes are kind of intertwined and work hand in hand together, we'll cover it as well. And its effect is, discard one card, then target one armed dragon monster you control, destroy one monster your opponent controls with attack less than or equal to the targeted monster's attack. You can banish this card from the graveyard, add one armed dragon monster from your deck to your hand. You can only use one effect of Inferno Roar per turn, and only once that turn. More level monster love like Silent Burning and Silent Sword Slash, but this time for a cooler archetype like Armed Dragon. Basically just a copy of Armed Dragon level 5's activated effect, however, it doesn't target, and the graveyard effect is way more powerful than it looks, being that it can search out any Armed Dragon monster, including Rider, Armed Dragon, Dad, and being the deck loves discarding and being an extra bit of removal, it helps both the Ojama side of the deck and the Armed Dragon side of the deck, and more importantly, Armed Dragon level 3 is all you need to use it. So normal summoning level 3 on your opening turn and having this at hand can jumpstart all of your Ojama plays. And now we get to the spell card that I've been hinting at through the rest of them. Ojama Ascension is a continuous spell card with the following effect. If another Ojama card would be destroyed, you can banish one Ojama monster from your graveyard instead, and you can only use one of the following effects of Ojama Ascension per turn, and only once that turn. First one is you can discard an Ojama card to draw one card. The second one is that if this card is sent to the graveyard, you can special summon as many of your banished Ojama monsters as possible. It is an activatable version of Pajama, having very similar effects. In fact, their floating effect is nearly identical, though this one can trigger when it is either popped on field or tossed to activate an Ojama effect, like Jack. And being that it floats after it's been pitched, it can help to chain block certain effects that you need, like one of the Retrain's search effects or Oja Magic, as well that it protecting Ojama cards, it protects Pajama, it protects Country, and it protects all of your monsters from being destroyed, which is absolutely wonderful. All you have to do is keep Ojamas in the graveyard to fuel. Now we get to something a little more interesting. Ojama Fusion is a normal spell card, and it is a fusion spell that reads, reveal one Ojama Fusion monster in your extra deck, then banish the fusion materials listed on it from your hand, field, or graveyard. Special summon that revealed monster. This is treated as a fusion summon. If you banished Ojama Green, Ojama Yellow, and Ojama Black, your opponent cannot activate cards or effects in response to this card's activation. Also, your opponent cannot activate cards or effect in response to the monster's summon. But you can only activate one Ojama Fusion per turn. It is a searchable fusion spell for the deck that is searchable within the deck itself using the Retrain effect, as well as being searchable via the Predaplant engine. And it being a quick play, it also means that you can interrupt your opponent's play on their turn, even if your play on your turn got shut down. Being able to special summon a king on your opponent's turn that your opponent can't solemn or negate the summon is incredibly powerful, being that his effect doesn't activate, it just kind of is. So for instance, the Salamangrate player that just link summoned Sunlight Wolf now has 3 less zones to deal with, and is locked into that extra monster zone with no zones to point to. And if you're just so happen to be playing against a Guard Dragon player, you can completely shut out Elpie and block the zone that 2 links are pointing to. Now we get to the last card in the lineup, Ojama Delta Barrage, a counter trap card with the following effect. When a spell or trap card or monster effect is activated while you control Ojama Green, Ojama Yellow, and Ojama Black, negate the activation, and if you do, banish that card and all cards with the same name as that card from the activating player's hand, deck, and extra deck. You can only activate one Ojama Delta Barrage per turn. Holy crap, is this card powerful! It plays into the theme of the retrains being the new core of the deck. As the vanillas were the core of the old deck, the retrains are now 100% the core of the new one. Barrage gives more control elements to the deck, as well as providing an extremely powerful shutout effect that can completely shut out a Sky Striker player or a Salamangreat player that has Sunlight Wolf or Baylynx and blow them completely out of the game. It's in the same vein as Hurricane, as it requires specifically yellow, black, and green out. However, the power level of the card is very big and makes the do I want to go for King to lock out their zones, or do I want to leave the vanillas out and maybe set up a powerful play with the Speller Traps, a viable option for the deck either way. In conclusion, the new support gives somewhere for all of the empty advantage that the deck is ridiculously good at getting. It gives it somewhere for it to go. It gives it something for the deck to do on its own without just fueling other decks and being a source of degeneracy for them, and makes the deck feel complete. Ojamas have always had kind of a scattered support, and they've never felt like a complete package. They've always been a part of something else, whether it be the rank 2 beast spam, Ojama ABC, or making Armed Dragon playable. And now it has very distinct themes. Overall, I've always had a soft spot for the Ojamas. I find their appearance super quirky and fun, and their unforgivingly powerful effects are really fun to pull off. No one ever has a bad time when you're playing Ojamas. Everyone just kind of thinks you're a little silly. It really brings me back to the good old days of when I first started the game, because they are one of the first real decks that I played, so it has a bit of nostalgia for me. And this has been Keiran, the Master of Ojamas, the Chaz, signing out.
Thanks, Keiran. That was Keiran Chikage, moderator on both mine and Davinator1212's private Discord servers, and a frequent contributor to Deck Doctors. That last role is by no means exclusive to him, as anyone willing to commit even $1 per video has the opportunity to help out, though there's no guarantee he'll go as far as to give you a starring role like this. Either way, simply liking, sharing, subscribing, etc. is far more helpful to me at this point, so if you can't afford to become a Patreon, that's perfectly fine too. Regardless, thank you guys so much for watching, and on behalf of Keiran, don't get run over, and we'll see you guys later.